the Business of Feedback. I'm Bo Bandy, CMO at Alchemer, and I'm joined today by Ryan Tamminga, SVP of Product and Services. And we're back to talk about all things feedback, but specifically today we're going to talk about NPS, or Net Promoter Score. Why don't we start with that, Ryan? Tell us what NPS is.
Yeah, so Net Promoter Score was a methodology that came out a while ago, actually. And the intent was you can ask a simple question of a rating scale to your customers to understand, would they be willing to go and tell somebody that they like your brand or not? And so the scoring of 0 to 10 gives people an indication of kind of how much or how little are they a supporter of your brand, and are they willing to kind of be a word of mouth marketer for your business, your services, your products, your brands.
So this is the standard age-old question we see everywhere of how likely am I to recommend Alchemer? One of the things I find interesting is that then when you gather all of that, it's not just like great, your company's an 8. It's on this much larger scale.
Yep. So it does have a kind of a complicated calculation in the background where you weight the value of each response. So your 0 through 6s are basically counted as zeros, and then your passive or detractors. Your passives are your 7s and 8s, and then your promoters and 9s and 10s. And the intent is when you look at the scoring over the course of the entire volume of responses, you want to see you see a bigger impact from your promoters, and you see a bigger impact on your score from detractors. And what's interesting about NPS is that people think it's a 0 through 10, so it should be a positive scale, but you can actually be a -100 or you could be a +100. So depending on how things go.
So being a 0 is actually just neutral. You're right in the middle.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to be a 0.
Nobody wants to be a 0.
So I've got lots of questions about NPS and how companies are using it. But before we get into that, maybe tell me a little bit about how you would build an NPS program, or what does it look like? How do you get started?
Yeah, so I think, again, it's an easy thing to get started because it is just a simple question. How likely you are to recommend the product or service or brand? I think the challenging thing that people run into when they're thinking about starting is, when should I ask that question? Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get an overall perspective of what that person thinks about your company or brand as a whole. A lot of times, and I think you'll find this anywhere you ask the question, is that what people are going to share is their most recent or most intense experience with your brand, whether that's good or bad. And so that's going to be the thing that reflects on how they score you. But what you want to do is you want to try to find it somewhere where there's enough space between an activity or a purchase or an interaction that they're thinking more broadly about your company as a whole versus that last interaction. So really trying to figure out where can you get the broadest sense of your customer at the time is the best place to start.
Love it. So lots of companies use NPS to measure and understand how their customers feel about them. But I also know that there's kind of a group of folks out there that are like, NPS is sort of just a junk vanity metric, doesn't really tell you anything about your customers. Where do you land on this? How do you feel about NPS?
I think it's how you deploy it and how you evolve your NPS program where you find the value. So I think people who look at your score as the end-all be-all are probably going to miss the point. They may think it's a vanity metric because they're like, I went from a -15 to a 6, right? It's so contextual to what's going on in the current state of your business that, two companies that do relatively the same thing who run an NPS program, you could argue that a 6 in one is just as good as a 35 in another, depending on what's going on in the feedback you're capturing. So I think as long as you kind of continue to evolve the way you think about your deployment of NPS and how you leverage it in the way that you're improving your experience for your customers, you're responding to them, you can get a lot of value out of it. You just can't rest on the fact that it's been running for years. And my job is to, at a quarterly executive meeting or something, show a chart that shows my rolling NPS over the last 3 years. It's not necessarily going to tell the story that's the intent of trying to help push the business forward from a customer experience perspective.
So on one hand, it is simple, but you have to be careful not to use it as an oversimplification and
Correct.
just assume things are great because our NPS is great.
Yeah.
What are some of the other, I don't know, advantages or pros of using an NPS or calculating an NPS?
So I think first it's familiar, right? I think
Yeah.
it's a trained behavior within consumers that people recognize that NPS score question, and so we've kind of conditioned our customers to know when you ask these questions, how should they respond. So there is some consistency around that methodology that lends to better data collection. So
Sure.
I think that's there. I think if you said some customers are saying give me a 1 out of 5 stars or two or three thumbs up, you can get very specific. So broadening it out a little bit to NPS makes it easier. I think the other advantage to it is, again, it's understood, and you can ask it in a lot of places within the customer experience, and it doesn't take from your customer's time, and so they're more willing to engage in those types of responses. So you get a lot higher feedback because it is a quick, familiar question. So yeah, those are probably the best.
So I love all of that, and I love when we can talk with our customers about doing anything that's quick, right? Because I think a lot of times, we will be ambitious in what we want to do and understand about our customers, and starting with NPS seems like a really straightforward way to start building a voice of customer program.
Yep.
You mentioned that over time NPS programs can evolve and become bigger and more mature. Tell us what that looks like.
Well, I think if you start with the intent of NPS is to move up and to the right? Like you want
Sure.
to get towards the 100 and you want to get more promoters
Sure.
than detractors. Here at Alchemer, for example, we do an annual study where we take a look at our what's our renewal rate of our software for promoters, passives, and detractors. And I'll tell you, my first time I did it, I was kind of shocked, and now I'm actually like, it's a focal point for me. But our promoters, as you would expect, renew at a really high rate.
Sure.
Our detractors actually renew at a really high rate as well. And our passives are the ones that are renewing a little bit less than our detractors. And so what that tells me is the way our NPS works in our business is people are using the scoring mechanism as a method of volume of their feeling. So they want me to listen to them more when they're very positive or when they're very negative. It doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to renew their software. They're just going, hey, this is a big issue for me, and because I gave you a 0, you should really look at it. So it's kind of trained us on how we take a look at the specific feedback from those customers and what we can do to make those better. And it also identifies a population of our customer base that I need to go focus on what's going to improve their experience so that they either moved hopefully to a promoter or a detractor,
Sure.
but I want them to engage a little bit more viscerally with what's going on within the products that they're using, because it makes it easier for me to help them.
So they're really not telling us that they're going to recommend us. What they're really telling us is that they're passionate. Good or bad, they are passionate, and you said engaged. I love that, right? They're passionate, they're engaged, they are obviously using us. What do you recommend companies do about those kind of more neutral folks? What have we done?
Well, I think the first thing is you've got to supplement your NPS score with another question, which is, or maybe two questions, which is, what's your favorite thing about us, and what's one thing you'd like us to improve, or what's a few things you'd like us to improve? The context that goes along with the score is actually the most important part, because if I look at my passives and I look at the context of the things they ask that they love about us and the things that they like us to improve, it gives me the ability to specifically focus and target the improvements that they're asking for. And if I can communicate back to them what I'm doing to improve things, that's how you shift, right? Here's all the things that you love about us. We're going to double down on that, and we'll shift your perspective of whether you're a passive or a promoter. And so getting the nuance of that context is the most important thing you can do when you're looking at that. Because again, if you've got a long-standing customer who's giving you a 0 and they're saying something is wrong, right? You think about people are very loyal to restaurants in a lot of cases, right? If I go to the same restaurant every Sunday night for 10 years and I love the place, but it just happened that last Sunday I didn't have a great experience, doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to come back, but I'm going to be really frustrated because I've invested so much of my loyalty into this brand and into this experience, and I'm disappointed that you guys let me down. If I tell you that and you understand why and you respond to me, there's a pretty serious metric that says handling poor situations significantly is more impactful to improving customer experience than continuing to provide the exact same level of experience from a loyalty perspective. And
Sure. So when something goes wrong, how do you deal with
Right.
it? How do you respond, and how?
And again, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm never going to come back to your restaurant
Yeah.
again, but it tells you something that you need to go do specifically to make sure that I'm a happy camper again. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, once you know what people need from you, whether good or bad, again, starting to integrate your feedback with the core systems data and operating data within your business helps you really understand how to look at each customer individually or as cohorts and say, maybe there's some customers that I do want to shift, right? Like there's a population of people that are experiencing my products and service in a specific area and they're all providing the same level of feedback. It makes it so much easier to change that specific problem and measure what those changes are going to do to the impact to your NPS or to your renewal rates or to additional purchases or repeat purchases or visits.
So I think I heard you start that with kind of connecting your NPS to your other business data.
Correct.
To look at it. And we talked a lot in the last episode about how companies are connecting it. So connecting your NPS program back to your systems to just make that connection,
Yep.
right? Of like, this is a group of customers. All right, so we're getting more context besides just score, because we're asking
Correct.
those other questions. Now we're connecting it back so that we can, again, have more context, but within the realm of their entire experience. Yep. What's next?
I think that the common theme in a lot of our conversations in this series continues to be focus.
Mm-hmm.
In order to really take NPS from being a vanity metric and something that you can really drive a lot of value out of, giving the context to who the person is who provided that score, the volume or the scoring mechanism, or scoring score they gave you, plus what they're telling you to go do, gives you specific actions that you can do to improve your customer experience. And then by doing that, you'll naturally increase your NPS. Or sometimes you may not. I think that's something that I talk to our customers a lot about is, just because you solved the first problem that somebody gave you a 1 or a 2 on, doesn't necessarily mean that the next time you ask that question, they're not going to give you a 1 or 2 about something else. Mm-hmm. And so, again, if you built the engine to, look at your NPS data in this type of way, and you built the machine to go in and start to respond to this data and start to follow up with your customers, the more you run people through the machine, the better outcome you're going to have as a business in terms of driving that better customer experience. And I think the people who drive a lot of value out of NPS before they even expand the program is just really be relentless about understanding what's going on to drive that focus on what to go do and how do you communicate that improvement back to your customer base.
Talk a little bit more about how you either with our program or what you've seen our customers doing, how they are sort of closing that loop and coming back to customers. Mm-hmm. How are they responding?
So one, I'll just use us as our first example. So one of the things that we've been doing for years is, personally, as the person who's responsible for our customer base, I want everyone in our business to be front and center with what our customers are saying, mm-hmm. unfiltered. Right? Like mm-hmm. we've got a lot of customer facing employees. We've got a lot of people who don't get to talk to customers all the time, right? Or, working on our product, or maybe they're, anywhere, right? Anywhere within our business. We publish every single NPS response from our customers in real time to a Slack channel that's available to every employee. And it's a place where we all engage in it. Is first and foremost the most important thing. So people can read what's coming in. And again, we provide the customer segmentation data on that response to everyone, so they can interpret what's going on, because everyone understands who our customers are from a segmentation perspective. Sure. So now everyone can see what's going on. One, it informs a lot of collaboration and interaction just within our own business about how we can improve things. Two, our CSMs are watching this come in real time, and they're engaging with it and proactively reaching out to our customers. And then I think the third thing and the most important thing we do is we create cases for our support team to proactively reach out to our customers and ask them more context or solve the problem, hopefully.
Sure.
Is the intent of that. And so, the thing that I love about the way we respond to our customers is that in real time, they may just be responding to a survey, but they're actually getting a case opened up and they're going to get a proactive reach out from our team.
I will say I love our Slack thread because, yes, your team, like when there's something, a negative response, right? Everybody gets negative responses. Like I know your team's often running it, but all of those positive responses that come in, right? My team on the marketing side mines that like crazy, right? And reaches out to your CSMs. Hey, I saw this. Could we do a case study? Or sometimes it's just, this is a new use case that I hadn't heard of. Like, let's do something on that, right? So I love it for the good and bad responses.
I think the thing about people always it's easy to respond to the bad stuff.
Sure.
What we found over the last few years is the more we respond to the positive stuff as well, the more our customers feel good about telling us what they're feeling, right? They start to build trust. They're like, they're listening to me. Even if it's just saying, love the product, think this is fantastic, here's what we did with you guys last week. The more we say, awesome, that's fantastic, the more feedback they give us. And again, the whole point of what we do is to get more customers engaged in the conversation that drives better results.
Well, I think we've all taken surveys where we're like, no one's listening. No one's listening, and it doesn't matter. I'm going to put my feedback here, but no one's listening. And so the fact that we acknowledge, hey, we're listening, and just naturally encourages more engagement, right? Which is what we all want.
For sure.
Okay, last question. I didn't tell you this one was coming. So what's the biggest mistake you see people making with their NPS programs?
I think there's probably two.
Okay.
One, they let it get stale. Right? They get some initial results of what's going on. They start to shift things up, or maybe they start to get a really high score and they kind of rest on it.
Yeah.
I think if you really want NPS to be successful, is you just got to keep working it all the time, right? There's always valuable information coming from your customers, and evolving the way you think about it and deploy the solutions to the feedback, the better it's going to work. So you got to not just stop.
I mean, the only way a static sort of NPS program would work is if your business is static. So I could see how that would be a problem, right? Like if things are happening in the business, the NPS should be happening too.
And I think the second is confusing the concept of asking NPS more and more places with how your customers experience your brand and products and services, right? So if I ask NPS after every single thing that your customers do with your business, whether it's a purchase or a return, or maybe it's a renewal, or maybe it's an upsell, whatever it ends up being, the more specific you are about how you ask, the more specific your customers are going to talk about that specific moment in the customer journey, which again is a really positive thing if that's your intent. So if what your intent is, I've got more of a brand NPS, and then I've got a post-support NPS, or maybe a post-return NPS, or things like that, I can actually get really great information at the moments that matter to your customers in terms of the way you're designing your customer journey. So if it's intentful, that's unbelievably powerful. But if what you're trying to do is get more feedback without that intent, it's going to get confusing.
Yeah, so sort of conflating asking NPS versus just asking for feedback.
Correct.
Right? So after, we've finished an implementation and saying, tell us how that went, we don't have to say the NPS question of, how would you recommend us? Just asking for feedback is acceptable, but we don't have to mix that into our NPS program.
I'll recommend you because I love the products that I buy from you, but I'm not going to recommend you because I don't like the return process. Like where's the most important piece of that customer journey to your customer, right? And what's going to drive their next interaction with you? Yeah.
You've kind of taken us full circle back to the when you build your NPS program, you've got to be thoughtful about when in the journey are you asking this. Ryan, this has been really great. We've covered lots of things on NPS. So maybe give us, what's your takeaway on NPS?
Sure. So 3 things. So 1, NPS is a valuable thing if you know how to deploy it and you manage it appropriately. 2, making sure you understand who's responding, who they are, where they are in the customer journey, and what they're asking you to go do helps you focus on how you improve those experiences to drive your scores up. And I think 3 is don't rest on success, right? You got to keep at it, and you got to keep working it, and you got to find more ways of incorporating the feedback into your business, across your business, to improve your customer experience, because you're going to get feedback about everything. It impacts every department within the business, and so just making sure that you've got that right focus, the right diligence on sharing the data will only be successful for improving your customer experiences going forward.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Business of Feedback.